Well, welcome to the May instance of NVTA's Technical Advisory Committee meeting. Chairman Boyce is unavailable tonight, so I will be sitting in as chair for the purposes of this evening. So calling the meeting to order. What do we have first? I guess we have to approve the minutes from the last meeting. Is that the first step here?
You cannot approve the minutes.
Because we can't, because we don't have a quorum. So we can't approve the minutes, so we will table that till next month. So I guess we'll move on. Summary of the notes. So we've done that. We can't approve that. I guess we'll move right into discussions with Mr. Jasper.
Thank you. And good evening. We do have Ms. Cavucci online, as well as Dahlia Levin, who you've met before from the consultant team. I'd also like to introduce Billy Boner here. And also Kevin Pullis in the back of the room, and actually Sri in the back of the room, also all part of either the consultant or the NVTA team working on the BRT action plan. There is no action for you tonight, which is good since you can't take any anyway. But there will be an action for you next month. So we will get in touch with Chair Boyce and make sure that gets everybody together. So what you're going to hear tonight is some preliminary findings from the online survey that we conducted, and also some high-level thoughts on where this is going, and we want to get your reaction to those. We'll also be happy to discuss any of the details if you want to discuss the details, but that's we have nothing here in the slide deck for you on that. So if you go to the next slide, please. These are the four things we want to cover. A quick recap and update on where we are. And then the first of two major items this evening, the phase 3 preliminary survey results. The survey was conducted between April 18th and May 18th. So we have very recently closed the survey and got you some preliminary analysis. We do not yet have information analysed on the open-ended questions, and also some deeper diving into cross-tabulations and so on isn't ready yet. Item C here is going to be our current initial take on these items. And then most important part of the evening is your discussion, questions and feedback. If we could hold the questions until each of sections ended, that would be helpful. But if you want to interrupt at any time, that's also fine. That's fine. I should keep going. So this slide here you've seen before. I'm not going to go through it other than say we're in phase 3. Was that properly loaded?
There's more on the slide in the deck. There you go.
It's extra slides.
Oh, was it animation? Oh, okay. So you can see where we are in phase 3. We're wrapping up the analysis of the survey and pivoting to the approval process. And let me first just quickly recap how we got here this evening. Cast your minds back a couple of years. Transaction, our long-range plan, was last adopted in December of 2022. At that stage, we were already funding to different degrees 5 BRT lines in Northern Virginia, and there were a whole bunch more high-capacity transit lines in transaction, which is fiscally unconstrained, so there's no commitments there. But it struck us at that time that it is really important that before we get too far into funding BRT, we really need to take a step back and kind of think about how all these things are going to fit together if they all come to be over the next decade or so. And really it was time to start thinking about BRT as a system rather than individual lines, particularly if we want BRT to be a meaningful alternative to driving. So this action plan, which I think we sent you when we first went to public comment, draws upon inputs from the public, our own analysis, our own staff coordination with the jurisdictions and agencies. And starting this evening, again, most importantly, inputs from the committees. We want your take on this too, before we get to the actual approval stage with NVTA later. So if you go to the next slide, just very quickly sum up these key dates in the approval process. Obviously tonight is your first on the list. June 18th, your next meeting will be when we'll be requesting you to endorse the action plan, and July 10th will be when we're asking NVTA to approve the action plan. So they're the key dates as far as you're concerned. I would say for the June 18th meeting, if you could be prepared, what we'd be likely asking you to endorse would be the 28-page report that is part of the public comment packet that's been available since April. But there's a placeholder for recommendations, and that would be the only change, other than a few minor tweaks that might be necessary. We're going to be putting recommendations in it, and then we'll be looking to you to endorse the whole thing or not, whatever you think. And if it's a conditional endorsement, that's fine too. So that's really kind of overview of where we're at. I would just like to say, and Billy may reference this in a moment too, this is the map that we took to the pop-up events. It looks in need of an ironing because it's been in and out of boxes and cars and rooms, buildings, but it is very much at the forefront of our efforts in getting interest. So if you at any point, if you want to look at particular lines or in transfer points on lines or anything like that, feel free to get up and take a look at it, or we can discuss it later. And for the benefit of the folks online, we also have a digital version of this that we can share if there are any questions that come up on that. Unless there's any questions for me right now, I'd like to hand over to Billy to talk you through what we learned from the public so far.
Yeah, thank you. First things first, as part of the public engagement effort that we just concluded, we did 10 pop-ups that were held across Northern Virginia. Those pop-ups gave folks an opportunity to learn more about BRT and to see what the proposed system would look like. The locations of these pop-ups were also carefully selected so that they were held in places where both people who mostly drive frequent, but also places where people who use transit frequent. So for the drivers, that was places like farmers markets, retail centers, distribution centers. And then there were 6 of those there, and then 4 other pop-ups that were targeting transit users by occurring at locations like metro stations or commuter park and ride lots and things like that. So in total, through these pop-up events, the engagement team had over 4,600 interactions with folks across all of those pop-ups. 27% of those were in Spanish, and over 4,600 pieces of print material were also distributed to folks through those. So lots of people came by and were able to see that big map over there, like Keith just pointed out, and they had the opportunity to take some things away with them as well. So regarding the survey specifically, so this is a piece of the pop-ups and engagement that we did. First, I want to do a quick overview of that survey. So we fielded the survey from April 18th through May 19th. So we were really fresh out of the field with this. Over those approximately 4 weeks, the survey was available both at pop-up engagement events around the region, but it was also posted online on the NVTA website for folks to go to, and it got posted on social media, and people had the opportunity, not just at pop-up events, to provide comments. So that survey covered the proposed BRT system and how it addresses their people's transit needs, their likelihood of using BRT, their preferred features for a BRT system in Northern Virginia, and how people would use the proposed BRT system. And in addition to those subject areas, the survey also solicited comments on the proposed routes, centering mainly around where the routes go, how long they run throughout the day, and how frequently they come throughout the day. So, of course, respondents also had the opportunity to just leave general comments on the network as a whole as well, if they so chose. Overall, the results of the survey are positive. Our team is still digging through and doing proper analysis of all of the comments, so I'm going to concentrate mostly in this presentation here on the final results of the other survey questions. In total, we received 587 completed surveys from across Northern Virginia, and even a few from outside the area. You can see there's 42 folks who said they live somewhere else. And I would say most of the ones that were somewhere else, there's a lot of folks from like Maryland, but still generally in the area, right? We also then took those folks that answered the survey and broke them out into groups of riders or non-riders. A rider is someone who identified public transit as their primary mode of travel, whereas a non-rider is someone who identified anything other than public transit as their primary mode of travel. Before I jump further in, I do want to do a quick caveat that these results are not intended to be representative of the population as a whole, but what they do give us is a good understanding of people's reactions to the idea of region-wide BRT and what is appealing about it and some of what it would need to have in order to meet people's needs.
Can I just break in for a question? How were these samples chosen? Were these just people who showed up at your events?
Yeah, so in
and then agreed to answer the survey? Okay, thank you.
Yep, folks were at the events. Folks on the engagement team were at the events. They had tablets and they were interacting with folks and completing the survey that way. They were also handing out cards and take ones that had like QR codes on them. And in addition to that, like I said, it was also posted on things like social media and just generally on the NVTA website.
So it could be responded to online?
Yep,
okay,
absolutely.
So very self-selected sample.
Definitely. And that's part of the reason I say, this is a great way of looking at what the folks who had an opportunity to hear about BRT and, weigh in and what they think, right? All right. So I want to start with some top level overall findings. Initially respondents gave ratings of the network on how well it addresses where they need or want to go, how well the times that BRT would operate would meet their needs, and how well the proposed frequency of BRT would meet their needs. Nearly 2/3 of respondents felt that the proposed system goes to all or most of the places they would need to go. So you can see that 63% on the left there. But even more felt that it would operate at all or most of the times of the day that they need it to, or that it would come as frequently or nearly as frequently as they would want it to. As you can see there, 85% and 82% respectively for each of those. What they were responding to is obviously, the proposed system and the proposed frequencies and spans that were presented to them. They had the opportunity to look at this map, so they were responding also to that map. These findings are fairly consistent across both riders and non-riders. However, one place where we did see a significant difference is among those younger than 35 and those aged 35 or older. The younger folks were significantly more likely to feel the system goes to all or most of the places that they would need to go. So we found that to be an interesting finding there. And there's a number of things you'll see I put at the bottom of these slides. These are great examples of things that we're going to look more closely at, especially as we delve deeper and deeper into the analysis of this survey. In addition to those specific 3 elements of service, we asked respondents to rate their overall likelihood to consider using the BRT system. Overall, 72% of respondents indicated that they would either be very likely or extremely likely to consider using the BRT system. This logically varies a bit by jurisdiction, as you can see here, with Arlington County, Prince William County, and Falls Church leading the way, 86%, 80%, and 86% respectively for each of those. Though even the ones that are, have the lower likelihood, it's still fairly high. You can see there, Loudoun County being the lowest, but still at 62%. Additionally, and not super surprisingly, current riders were also more likely to consider using the BRT system than their non-rider counterparts. And again, we see that the younger folks, those younger than 35, are also more likely to consider using the BRT system if it was available to them. We asked respondents to choose the most important characteristics of BRT system to them, and to help us kind of prioritize like what's most important to folks. The results show that reliability and on-time performance are key, with their top choices being dedicated lanes and other features that allow BRT to travel quickly and reliably, with 27% of folks saying that that's of great importance to them. Similarly, nearly as much is that folks indicated that they need service that reliably shows up on time. And that was at 25%. So right up there with dedicated lanes, traveling quickly and reliably. Their focus is obviously on how reliable and frequent the system is, rather than some of the additional features and options that a BRT system presents for riding on board and waiting at the bus stop. We can see that those two categories at the bottom, features that improve your experience while on board the bus and features that make stops and stations nicer, come in at just 2%. So people clearly are very focused on, reliable and frequent service. Additionally, what we did was we asked folks to identify and select 3 lines that they would be most likely to use. We did this because, for a couple of reasons, obviously because we want to get a feel for which lines they see on this map that are, most compelling to them. But we also followed up their choice with a few questions about it. We asked them, what they thought about the spans and frequencies. We asked them what they might use it for and when they might use it. So the most selected lines here were line number 26, which is the I-95 Express line, line number 21, which was the I-66 Express line, and line number 16, which is the Fairfax Boulevard Express line. Or excuse me, not Express line, it was Fairfax Boulevard line. Each of those came in at about 15%. This table that I have up here is just the top mentions. So they're, out of all the 28 that we showed them, these are the ones that were chosen the most. And after selecting those routes that they would use, they also specified generally for what purposes they would use those routes, like I mentioned. Not surprisingly, travel to or from work or job-related business is the top reason. People are looking for ways to improve their commute. And then shopping, entertainment, or restaurants and bars is close behind at about 65%. Additionally, the lines that people chose did vary a bit by jurisdiction, which is, makes a lot of sense. Like those folks in Prince William County, like I pointed out here, were more likely to have selected the I-95 Express than residents of other jurisdictions. And that, is similar across when you look at the locations of the lines and the jurisdictions that tended to choose them more often. In that same vein, we asked them what time of day they would be most likely to use the lines, and how many days per week they would be likely to use those lines. So 92% would use their selected route on weekdays, and only about 53% to 60% would be doing so on the weekends. Now, when I say that 92% would do so on weekdays, what I mean is that they would do so on at least one weekday during the week, right? That doesn't mean that 92% of people are going to ride the BRT on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday throughout the week, but they will at some point during the week. And we can see that the largest proportion of respondents indicated that they would ride during the morning and the afternoon peak times, and slightly less would ride during the off-peak times. And that's not exactly surprising. I think that's why we call them the AM and the PM peak, right? So This is a bit of validation, though, at least that people are going to be using it in some of the ways that we might typically expect. On how many days per week they would potentially use BRT, respondents indicated an average of about 3 days per week. The actual average is about 3.1. So now, like I said, this is all very preliminary. Or I shouldn't say this is very preliminary. These numbers, we've gone through and confirmed these numbers and weighted them and everything. What we are doing now is, like I said, taking all of those comments in, reading through all those comments, categorizing them, looking at what people said and the general sentiment of those comments, because we got so many of them and there's lots that have lots of great information in them. So now our task is to really just take more time digging through them and analyzing. And in the coming weeks, we'll continue to delve even deeper into the results of this survey and the comments that we received. So, lots of work still to be done, but so far things are looking pretty positive and looking good.
Question?
More of a comment, really. One, it looks like a nicely done survey, given, you know, the results and from the sample that you chose. The comment on my general experience with surveys like this, people who say they will not change their behavior are very likely to not change their behavior. People who say they will change their behavior, about a third of them may actually change their behavior. And I'm sure you have some insights like that that will be going into the analysis that's being done.
Can I chime in here?
Yeah,
Yeah, you're absolutely right, first off. In fact, what we do in these situations, and one of the reasons we use the scale we use, we ask the 5-point scale.
Yeah.
But I always tell it very likely somewhat, I don't care what the middle point is, because I don't care about the middle point. I care about the top two boxes are our term for it. We focus just on them. And furthermore, the rule we generally use for that is of the people who say they're very likely. That's top one.
Yeah.
Only, you can assume only 50% of those folks will follow through. The folks who give that second point, very likely, I think was ours, only 20% of those folks will follow through. The bottom three, well, some of them ride, sure, somebody's gonna ride. But we don't focus on them. We focus on those top two.
Yeah.
And those are the folks we're gonna look at. In fact, Keith and I were just chatting about this. We're gonna take a look at those folks who said they're extremely or very likely to do so and contrast them against the folks who said they were less likely. Assuming and I agree with you, assuming that that's correct, that they're not likely to ride, and see if we can find out who it is who's likely to ride and how can we meet their needs and discover who they are and help the individual jurisdiction speak to them.
Yeah. Couldn't have said it better myself.
I had a question as well. So these survey responses, is this simply from the pop-up or is it from all respondents?
This includes the pop-ups and, excuse me, the results that came online, or basically anybody that took the survey between April 16th and May 19th
They're
is included in here.
What was roughly the split between online and in person?
You know, I don't know that off the top of my head, and I will.
I would totally
check
like
on
you to know that answer. We'll make sure it will definitely be in the report we provide.
Yeah.
I believe I'm pretty sure it leans toward pop-up events.
It leans heavily towards
Always
pop-up
heavily
events.
Pop-up
Yeah.
events, but I don't trust my own memory to pull an exact number. And to be clear, by the way, on the point you made earlier and any concerns about sampling, is this a representative sampling of the region? No, it's not, nor should it be at this point. This is not meant to be representative research. It's meant to be at this point informative research. As Sri and I were just talking here. There will be a time and a place for a representative study between now and when the first buses roll down the first line. Absolutely. Right now, we just need information from people to understand people so we can help shape the system. Once we have something a little more concrete, for lack of a better term, then would be the time when we can roll out a truly representative study of the region.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So on your slide about overall BRT systems ratings, you indicated, again, 63%, the BRT system goes most all of the places I would want or need to go. I'm just curious, I mean, it may be in the comments, it may be in everything you're still going through. Was there an opportunity for people to suggest the places they wanted to go for that to be
Absolutely.
incorporated?
Let me tell you, I've been digging through those comments all day today. So, yeah, there's, basically these three questions actually, it asks them how well it meets their needs and on where it goes. Follow-up question was asked, why do you say that? What places would you like to see it go? And same goes for the second one here. Most all the times of day when I would want or need it to. They gave a rating, we asked them a follow-up question of why did you say that? What times would you need it to if you're not happy with that? And then, like I said, same thing goes for frequency as well. So all of that is part of the comments and what we'll be incorporating going forward as well.
Any other questions? Do we have anybody online who has any questions?
Yeah, head shake.
No questions for me,
okay.
thank you.
Then I guess we can proceed.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's skip to the next slide, please, Alyssa. So as we're looking kind of to the next month or two, we're trying to pull everything together that we've learned and figure out what the next step should be. Obviously, as Billy has already said, the analysis of the survey is ongoing. Let me just step back again, very quickly, to say, just to recap, some of you may have heard me use this expression before in other contexts. Think big, start small, build momentum. That's what we're trying to do here, is think big with this. Start small, which are the 5 lines that we're already funding, and then build momentum towards something between the 5 lines and this. That's kind of where we are. We very much have a system in mind, not a series of individual lines, as we look towards meaningful alternatives to driving. While NVTA will retain its multimodal credentials regardless. This is a non-binding blueprint, and by that I mean it's non-binding from like a technical engineering point of view. We've made some assumptions about the realistic levels of bus priority that could be implemented in the short to medium term, and we've done that in conjunction with the jurisdictional staff. But there's no commitment or expectation that when these lines get built, they will necessarily have to do that. It was more a question of, in order to analyze it, we've got to have something specific in the model to code. And so the technical engineering details are not binding, and neither is any decision to either endorse or approve this plan financially binding, in the same way that transaction is not financially binding on NVTA. It is a plan. And the financial part of it comes in through our 6-year program process, where jurisdictions and agencies make funding requests to us. In the event that they make funding requests to us in the future regarding BRT, we would like those requests to be compliant with this, so that we can work towards an interoperable system, as opposed to making decisions in the next few years, which will preclude a lot of the 28 route network to come together. So that's kind of recap and big picture. So turning to the slide here, preliminary survey results, well, Billy's just giving you that. And I think in 1 or 2 words, you would summarize what we've learned so far as
Overall positive.
overall positive. Yeah. In terms of the technical analysis, Dalia, I'm going to come to you in a moment with 2 words, how you would summarize the technical analysis. It's very, very complex, obviously, but what we found, what we've published in the documents, are that there are good performance among many of these lines, particularly when we look at the lines from the perspective of how might they score if a funding request came to us, keeping in mind that congestion reduction relative to cost is a legislatively mandated metric that we have to look at. So Dahlia, 2 words on technical analysis results.
Strengths and weaknesses, right? A lot of the routes perform really well overall, but I think the sort of in-depth analysis that we've done helps highlights relative strengths and weaknesses of different routes and highlights a lot of questions about each specific route that still need to be answered moving forward.
Okay, thank you. The next bullet on here is, you can't quite read it here, but staff coordination. I'll go into a little bit more detail. That there has been extensive coordination and collaboration from the beginning to the end, or at least the end as of where we are now, with the jurisdictional agency staff. We've taken on board the work that NVTC has done on behalf of DRPT, looking at transit strategic plans. We've looked at Better Bus. We're looking at what DMV Moves is coming up with right now. Everything that we're doing is broadly consistent, in many cases builds upon that work. But there are some differences as well, given that there are different motivations for doing each of those pieces of work. We do believe that, as well as helping folks perhaps seek NVTA funding, an action plan such as this will help the region when seeking non-NVTA funding. The fact that you can point to a plan and say to the federal government, maybe not in the next near future, but when things settle down with the FDA's CIG program, that applicants to that program will be able to point to this blueprint and say this is part of a bigger picture in Northern Virginia, and that will be very positive. We have asked jurisdictions to consider adding BRT and BRT facilities when they update their comprehensive plans to protect alignments, potential locations of mobility hubs and so on, as part of their long-range planning process. We can't make them do that. It's entirely their discretion to do that, but we can ask that if you're aware of this and you support this, please take that step. And so far, without commitment, obviously, I think they understand why we're asking that question and are not highlighting any particular problems at this stage with that. So from a staff coordination point of view, I'd say we've done a lot and it's achieved a lot. So we're pretty pleased with that so far. And so overall, I think there is a body of evidence coming together that says that this is something that the regions should be seriously considering. There's public support, there's analytical support, there's jurisdiction staff coordination support. As Dahlia said, there are challenges, and we'll come back to that in a minute on the last slide. There are challenges, but there is evidence of positive impact as well as public support, or at least generally positive public reaction to date. What we have learned from the survey is that what sets BRT aside that the public like about BRT, as Billy mentioned one of his slides, the attributes of fast, frequent, and reliable. And I like it a whole lot more if it's fast, frequent, and reliable than if it isn't. And so if we want a fast, frequent, reliable BRT, then that is going to require some investment and some careful thought going ahead. But overall, we think that it's important to maintain the momentum that this piece of work has established, and then kind of get further into the detail through the next step. So I would just, before I go through these next steps, I would just preface this by saying we're not there yet. We're still waiting for more survey information to come to us. But in all likelihood, these next steps will form the basis of the recommendations that we will add to the document that we'll be requesting you to endorse. So this is kind of like an early peek at these. possible recommendations, but we're calling them next steps for right now. So we need to continue to integrate BRT into our own processes and the jurisdictions planning processes. And for us, transaction is the big one. We also have the transportation technology strategic plan, and then the jurisdictions have the comprehensive plans. So I think all of that is important to keep moving with. I would say also that if there's any projects that are currently eligible through their inclusion in transaction, they can actually request funding from us right now. We have an open call for projects right now. So we'll see if any come in. But it's not our expectation that they will at this stage, but that door is already open. And subject to the deeper dive of the public survey information and looking at those open-ended questions, we may find that there is more evaluation needed before we can really be sure of what that means, but that's something that we think should be addressed in next steps. We do want to ensure interoperability across jurisdictional lines. Northern Virginians don't travel based on jurisdictional lines. They're based on where they live and where they need to go. And if that means jurisdictional lines are crossed, so be it. But if BRT needs to cross those jurisdictional lines, as most of these do, apart from a few in Fairfax County, which stay within the county, we need to think about interoperability, who operates the service and MOUs and that kind of stuff. We also need to think about use of a facility in one jurisdiction that NVTA or others are paying for by vehicles from a transit agency in another jurisdiction. We do not want to pay for something that is like VIP access only for the jurisdiction in which it was built. That's an important part of the difference between a system and a series of individual lines. And we need to do more work looking at that. Something we did in phase one of the work was look at peer regions around the country to see how Northern Virginia's stacked up, particularly from the point of view of density of residents and jobs in the corridors. And by and large, there are BRT lines around the country in corridors with similar densities to the one we have here in Northern Virginia. So we picked three peer regions in particular. I think in the upper Midwest comes to mind, but we know there are others. In fact, we've had a region reach out to us in the last couple of weeks to say, we're in a similar place to you, can we share experiences? I think that is great for us, and they obviously think it's great for them. So I think getting deeper into the peer exchange side of things would be quite important for us. We definitely know from comments we've already had tonight that there is an ongoing need to inform and build consensus. And that is definitely something that we need to continue doing as we build momentum. We also like to think that that NVTA can help with design standards for, say, transfer stations or stations where there is expected to be a heavy transfer taking place. And we've not published it, but we do have a list of like top 10 transfer locations based on the model analysis that we've done. They kind of become what is now generally called mobility hubs. So mobility hubs is something that's very much in the wheelhouse of BRT, and it's in the wheelhouse of NVTA to look to see whether we should fund that. But if we're going to fund that, we want to be sure we're funding something that is consistent across the region. And we also have a big topic, which I'll summarize as overlay versus replace. Our analytical approach has been mostly to overlay BRT on the existing bus services and look at the impact of that overlay. But in reality, there may be some, if BRT were to come along on this scale, then there might be some logic to looking at the existing service to see whether that's still needed in quite the same way. So, but those sort of level of detail type issues are something we could look a bit more at, but probably even in more detail, the jurisdictions will do that as part of their own planning effort. So there's a lot of things in here that we see as next steps that are beyond the scope, schedule and budget for this, but which are nonetheless, we believe very important to keep looking at. So, that will probably lead us into our recommendations going forwards. So if we just skip through a couple of slides here, it's just really where it comes to you. 15 minutes for you to ponder on this. So 3 discussion questions here that we'd like an initial reaction to, and your reaction might be these are the wrong questions, which is fine too. But what is the biggest opportunity and the biggest challenge you see facing deployment of a regional BRT system? I could suggest some opportunities and challenges, but I'm going to leave that to you. If you identify any challenges, could you give us a sense of what we should do, what the region should do to address those challenges? And is there any additional analysis or more detailed information you feel as though you need before you can make a recommendation, or that you would recommend be collected in a next step of this work? So we'll leave those on the screen, and if you've got any instant feedback, that'd be great. If you want to ponder that, it's fine too.
Well,
Before we
people are
get to this, could
thinking,
you go back one slide? Keith, maybe Dahlia and then one could answer the question.
Yeah.
The last bullet point on the FTA stops model. I know the stops model was developed for evaluating major capital investment projects, but I thought it was mainly developed on rail systems. Has it been applied on BRT elsewhere? Dahlia, can you speak to that?
Yeah. It's absolutely applied on BRT systems around the country. Frank, the question I expected you to ask about this is that it was also developed primarily for corridors. It can be worked at the regional level, although it is mostly designed to work with corridors. But yes, it is the standard tool for most of the small starts applications through CIG.
Thank you.
I note in particular we use the word specify. I don't say build. I think building it is going to be a big step, but I think specifying it will probably be important to get regional input to that, and it'd be important to get FTA input to that too before we get too far in that process.
Stops was designed to be a whole lot less complex and easier to apply than the traditional 4-step or however many steps it is now model.
Right, but there are some inconsistencies, I think, between the model that we use for our work and what FTA needs. So if the region believes that will be good, and I guess that would be the case if the region believes we should be requesting FTA funding, then the alternative will be that each jurisdiction that does that would need to build their own model. So there's obviously some economy of scale here, particularly with something this expansive, if it were to be a regional model.
In terms of challenges, aside from the obvious one of where does one find the money to build and operate such a system, I think the biggest one is going to be finding places where there's adequate right of way to do it without taking existing highway, multi-user lanes, and how you deal with the objections when it does become appropriate to take an existing roadway lane to put in a bus priority facility or a bus exclusive facility.
Right, or even adding a dedicated right-of-way lane as well. No, we agree. Not much to discuss on that, we agree.
Yeah.
if I may, there's a question on the remote participant.
Please,
I
Michelle.
had yes, thanks. I had a question about something that was said earlier on this slide, and I'm not sure if I heard it correctly or maybe I misinterpreted it, but and then I have a follow-up question after you answer this one related to it. Did I hear you mention that if
an agency wanted to apply for funding or wanted to pursue one of these as a project, that we would want it to fall within the blueprint shown in this plan. Now, did I hear that to mean that they couldn't apply for funding for a BRT project that was not in this blueprint? Or is that not accurate? What, in other words, is our endorsement of this plan and implementation of this plan locking something in for all the agencies and they would not have the flexibility to do something else?
The jurisdiction agencies have been very integral in the development of this plan. So if they wanted to do something that was dramatically different to this plan, my question to them would be, how, if we've been doing this since fall of 2023, are we not aware that you have a BRT concept that is completely at odds with this? So I think the situation that you're describing is probably a possibility. I would certainly hope it's a remote possibility, but even then, if there was such a thing, something that was inconsistent with this, I think we could still have a conversation about it, because the obvious next step would be, well, should we change the blueprint to incorporate the concept that we're only just hearing about for the first time? In all of our contacts through BRT planning working group meetings, feedback submitted through a comment process that has been ongoing over a period of months. It wasn't just a one and done thing. Nothing like that has arisen. I think folks, for the most part, understand the benefit of working towards a system as opposed to trying to beat the system.
Great.
To my metaphor.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
I would say that in going back to the actual questions on biggest opportunity and biggest challenges, certainly I think this is a major opportunity for the region to significantly expand some transit capabilities. And I love this map, by the way, wrinkles and all. I've been sitting over here studying it. It's a significant network. The flip side of that certainly has been, can we actually get people to use it? I'm encouraged to see that the younger, that younger set seems to be much more amenable to that style of travel. And maybe it's too far in the weeds, but it seems to me like part of that challenge is if the reliability and is such a critical component of that. A lot of that is the information piece and being able to get reliable information to potential travelers on when that next ride is available, where it is, how long it'll be. So like I said, that's the information part maybe is kind of ancillary to the infrastructure. I don't know if that's too far in the weeds, but that seems to me like always a challenge in finding a way to get that information in a usable form to potential users.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. As you probably know, NVTA does fund transportation technology projects, including transit signal priority. But in this case, what you're talking about is traveler information, real-time traveler information. Those technologies exist today. There are certain parts of the region where you can get that information at a bus stop. I think it's very important that be part of BRT. And since we're taking an holistic look at this, our funding isn't just simply limited to heavy infrastructure or even buying rolling stock. It does include. We've got 3 examples of this, funding bus maintenance and storage facilities. Obviously, if you buy extra buses, you've got to put them somewhere. And I think the technology piece of this is equally important. So we would see it as being part and parcel of this, and I completely agree that one of the barriers that we've come across in our focus groups, and in particular, is that people are willing to use transit, but they just haven't got a clue how to do it, or they just don't trust the information sources that they have, which might be a published timetable or I don't know, nothing very high tech. So I think we would certainly embrace that. Definitely be a feature we would like to see at stations, not just at mobility hubs, but all stations. Obviously, that means you've got to put some technology on the vehicles as well, but we already do that. That's what transit signal priority is. It's roadside infrastructure and infrastructure on the vehicles themselves. Now, WMATA is kind of beginning to transition to a cloud-based system, which is a good step forward. But that still involves the same basic things. You've got to be able to track the buses. You've got to be able to track what's going on in the real world and connect them together. So.
Yeah, certainly if you look at a bus schedule, printed bus schedule, that it's daunting to try to figure out.
Right. Now, it's important for BRT that the schedule is such that you should not ordinarily need to use the timetable.
Yeah.
I mean, if you probably just need to know that buses are coming every 10 minutes. And then if they're coming every 10 minutes, you really, average wait is going to be 5 minutes. It's going to be in those annoying times when you see it like you've got to wait another 9.5 minutes. But, for the most part, average would be about 5 minutes. I don't think, that is going to be a barrier. Okay. And certainly it's going to do away with the need for printed timetables.
One other issue you may run into, well, it's fairly easy to get jurisdictions to see the logic of zoning for higher density near rail stations. But getting them to zone for appropriate densities and land use configurations near BRT stops and may be a bit more difficult.
Darla, I don't know whether you want to speak to that. Certainly Fairfax County in the Route 1 Richmond Highway BRT corridor is using the stations along that line as hubs for development. So I think there is a belief that you build it and they will come applies to BRT. It may not apply to regular local bus, but when we in phase 1 we looked at densities. We found mostly that the densities were good, and even when we looked at, as part of one of our scenarios, at looking at redistributing density around a particular jurisdiction, to look at kind of pushing more of that into the corridors, it didn't make a whole lot of difference to the ridership and the performance, because I think the jurisdictions are very much leaning towards putting the density into the corridors where we would want to put BRT anyway. Now, whether it's enough density is another matter. But what we found was, to say, that even in the lower ridership corridors, we found that at least when you look at congestion reduction relative to cost, they were performing. Because that would put them in the competitive range.
With the rail system, particularly in the suburban jurisdictions, at least in the early years, it's relied heavily on park and ride.
Yeah.
And it's not so clear that BRT will attract park and ride to the same degree. Now, you look at things like, I know the Prince William County routes seem to come up fairly high in your survey, but what comes up from Prince William County is long-term park and ride to express bus experience that's been going on for 40 years. And that's really more express bus than BRT.
Yeah. That's a good point. It's definitely something we'll want to take a deeper look at, and perhaps find some more detailed examples of how it works around among our peer group.
I'll just add.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to add, considering how this needs to be implemented and approached differently across such a big region as Northern Virginia comes into play there as well, right? In Southern Prince William County, we may have places that are looking more at park and ride access, at least in the time horizon we're looking at. Whereas in inner Fairfax County or potentially, in Arlington County, that's going to be different. But it's a starting point that continues to evolve. So I think there's different approaches based on where we are and where the individual jurisdictions are, both with their transportation choices and with their land use choices moving forward.
So recognizing that the surveys, all the information that's been collected so far is going to continue. I mean, there'll be more information collected as things proceed. Just looking at the results of the surveys, looking at when you ask the question about what are the top 3 BRT lines you'd most likely use, they don't that well overlap with the additional 5 that it seems like are the ones that are the 5 that are being suggested to be the ones to be the first 5. I only saw, I think, 2 of them, and they're kind of at the bottom of the list, and I understand why. But is there any concern, again, this is just a question, any concern that some element of critical mass could be lost if you roll out BRT to lines that maybe aren't necessarily as popular as others might be, that might pull riders more to those lines faster initially right off the bat? Just, I don't know if it's even been thought about, or if these are the 5 lines, there's any potential for changing. I'm not saying there should be. I'm just wondering if that's something that, just what the thought process might be there to consider that.
Yeah, I mean, we're steering away from doing anything that looks like prioritizing things. Even ranking them is difficult because we're using so many different measures to look at them. So, how you weight the measures will strongly influence that kind of analysis. But really the main reason is, the local jurisdictions have got to figure out, local priorities, and they know their geography better than anyone. And if a jurisdiction is ready to come forward and seek funding for a BRT line number 6, those lines are just notional. They're not actually what they're going to be called, but we had to call them something just so we could track them, other than by their names. But I think if the first 5, well, one of the first 5 lines is already operational, Metroway in Arlington, Alexandria. I mean, we'll see. I think the Fairfax County Richmond Highway, that's the branding name for it, is, as mentioned earlier, that they're expecting that to attract a lot of development. So in the early days, the ridership may not be as high as it could become, but I think there's already a bus service, Richmond Highway Express or something like that, Rex, which I think is performing pretty well. And remember what I said is our analysis was an overlay. So the ridership we're seeing is over and above what's there now, not instead of what's there now.
Just to chime in real quick on those survey results, I would still to attempt to project ridership. So first off, it's not a representative sample, to the earlier point. And second, we asked that question predominantly, first to find this general interest, but more to set up subsequent questions. You can certainly use survey results to help project ridership as a piece of the puzzle, but we would ask it differently. And again, it's one of those things to think about down the road. So.
Yeah, I mean, I recognize that there's only 500 people here, I mean, or so it's not really representative of the overall community for the whole region. So, but I was just curious though, as far as the selection of routes, and then, and whether that could potentially be modified over time. But I mean, it sounds like there's still a lot to be figured out. So yeah,
and in a previous meeting, Dahlia did present to you the findings of the model analysis, and we can reshare that if you like. But that I think was a 2045 projection. So again, we're still looking quite a way into the future with that.
I think the Route 1 BRT, there's a lot to be learned from that, because it's an example of implementing BRT on a facility that's owned by VDOT. rather than by a local jurisdiction. And there will be lots of conflicts between what those who are designing and operating a transit service would like to have and what an agency that is focusing on highway design and construction will want to have. So there'll be a lot of lessons to be learned as that goes
Yeah,
on.
you're totally right. I think, more generally, BRT is transit, but transit operates on roads. And we've been very careful to ensure that our BRT planning working group has representation from VDOT in particular, but also the highway perspective, should we say, the signals perspective, as well as the transit and long range planning perspective. So you're absolutely right. I think that's very important. But to your more specific point about Route 1, I think not just Route 1, but Metroway, the 2 lines in the city of Alexandria, and the Route 7 line from Tysons to the Mark Centre, which is a multi-jurisdictional line. I think those 5 together are going to be a rich source of lessons learned that the other 23 lines, whatever it is, could learn on. And we want to make sure that that is the case, recognizing that a lot of those may be sufficiently far advanced in their planning process that we can't reasonably expect them to turn the clock back and start a different set of design standards or what have you. So there's got to be something that blends what the work that's already being done with the work that is yet to be done, and those 5 lines and the jurisdictions involved will be a rich source of experience and lessons learned as well across a range of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions? Any questions online? No. No. Well, then, thank you.
Thank you.
Without a quorum, do we need to move adjournment or?
I think we can adjourn. Well, is there anything else? Are you?
There's an NVTA update item on the agenda.
There is.
I do not see Monica on the call. She was going to be remote, so I don't really have a whole lot I can say. I've mentioned the date of the next NVTA meeting, at which we will be having an extended discussion along these lines with authority members, so we can get their feedback in that kind of group format. In addition to that, there's some SPAR activity, standard project agreement activity, which is a result of our project delivery focus over the last 12 months, which is really paying dividends in terms of projects either getting finished, catching up with their billing, or if the projects aren't moving, voluntary cancellations of projects. So there'll be some activity related to that. We'll be doing a regular quarterly update on transportation trends, which we started during COVID, but just because the pandemic is over doesn't mean the numbers aren't still interesting. So we'll be presenting something on that. And Sri, was there anything else? Any other? I don't think I'm missing one major action item.
The strategic plan.
Strategic plan. Strategic plan. The goals and vision have been approved, but that's basically where we are with that.
Before we leave, I think it'd be just nice to take a minute to think about Jerry Conley, our local congressman who died today, who was so instrumental in bringing so many projects to Northern Virginia.
Thank you. Well, if there's nothing else, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? Well, then we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.